parents are burned out. 5.5 million American parents are at clinical levels of parental burnout. And it's just because we're trying to do so much. We want our children to be successful. And so we're trying to do all of the things, but we don't have to do all of the things. And so I think the number one thing that parents can be doing, and no parent wants to hear this, and everyone's probably gonna roll their eyes, but it's
Welcome back to Mic'd Up. I'm your host, Mike DiCioccio, and today's guest is a powerhouse who rose from the challenges of a gang-infested neighborhood on the south side of Chicago. As the daughter of a Mexican immigrant, her life took a dramatic turn at 11 years old, igniting her passion to become a clinical child psychologist. She specializes in tackling antisocial and aggressive behaviors in children and also in teens, driven by a mission to ensure that no family faces the struggles that she did. In 2021, she took a bold leap, leaving a tenured position to launch BrightSpot Families, where she crafts dynamic workshops focused on coping strategies, relationship building, and parenting skills. And in 2023, she delivered a powerful TEDx talk titled From Murder to Mission, How I Found My Life's Calling, which is now available on YouTube. So let's dive into her incredible journey and her impactful work. Welcome to the show, Andrea Mata.
Hello. Thanks for having me, Mike.
Andrea, thank you so much for being here. I'm just going to share with our audience that you and I met, it was about a year ago. Mm-hmm. We intended on this coming out at that time. And for different reasons, we didn't release it, but now we're doing this and it feels very much like the right moment. So everything does happen for a reason.
Yes, I completely agree.
And I want everybody to know that they can connect with you on LinkedIn, Instagram, and brightspotfamilies.com. Everything is right there in the show notes and clickable for you. So what I want to ask you first is, what happened when you were 11 that dramatically changed your life's trajectory? How did that experience actually fuel your desire to become a child psychologist?
Yeah, so growing up, I lived in a very close-knit, sarcastic Mexican upbringing. Even though I look white, I am 50% Mexican. My dad was born and raised in Mexico. And we were close-knit. I was the youngest of 4 kids. So I had 3 older brothers. At that time when I was 11, one was 21, one was 20, and then my brother, Francisco, was 18. And so what happened during that time was my brother Cisco was murdered by someone that he considered his friend. And it rocked our whole family because we grew, and someone recently asked me, they're like, well, did he get murdered because you guys lived in a gang-infested territory? And I was like, no, that would have been better, and would have made more sense than what actually happened. Was this person that he befriended during his gap year and was legitimately trying to help for reasons that we still don't understand 29 years later, or we will never understand because the murderer has since deceased. He killed my brother. And if we fast forward 2 years, when I'm 13 and I'm sitting in the courtroom and I had just written or read my impact statement. So my victim impact statement, for those of you who don't know who it is or don't know what it is, it's when the victim of a crime, they are right before the sentencing, they're able to read how that person's behaviors impacted their life. So I remember stepping into the witness stand, reading it, staring down the murderer, and he immediately looked down and I was like, you coward. And now as I say that now, I get this visual of my 5-year-old screaming, cowards, and just out of fun kind of things. But anyways, back to the story. I
think that I just want to say too, Andrea, is that him feeling that moment and hearing your words at 13, you were 11 when your brother was murdered, right?
Yep.
So, it's still pretty fresh. I mean, a couple years later, but you were still young, and to hear it and you to share those words and him to look down, It's pretty obvious that he felt that and knew what he did, and it wasn't like, what was it, a situation where he was trying to, like, did his attorney try to say he didn't do it, or they just admitted to it from the beginning?
So it took 2 years, and so they tried all of the tactics. They tried to do, not guilty by reason of insanity, but it was premeditated, so that went out the window, but it still took time. They also tried to say that he wasn't competent to stand trial, but again, that went out the window because they evaluated him. And so that's why it took 2 years to kind of go through, even though he confessed to his crime and they had it on video. Like the police station in Florida did everything right. And so it just took 2 years because of normal procedures that will happen in a murder trial.
Hmm. It's crazy. And
Mhm.
so you guys are going through that, you're stomaching that, 13 years old, and I didn't mean to stop your
Nope,
story
you're
there. I
okay.
just was kind of getting kind of the world of scene, imagining that happening. So then continue on from there.
Yeah, so the judge comes back into the courtroom and he sits down and we all sit down and he scans the room. He looks at my parents and me. My two older brothers were not allowed to be in the courtroom because even though we're Mexican, we're still, like, my one brother's 6'4" and my other brother's 6 foot. And the guy who murdered our brother was 5'7" on like 135 pounds soaking wet. And so they weren't actually allowed in the courtroom because they didn't trust themselves. And so it was just my
Wow.
parents and it was just my parents and I in the room. And the judge looks at us, he takes a deep breath, he pauses, and then he says, "I'm not sentencing this man to death, not because of moral or professional objections against the death penalty, but simply because this man had a rough life." And I remember sitting there as a 13-year-old flabbergasted, being like, wait, so I came from this really good family. This person came from a bad family, had a bad childhood. I will not deny that. But that's the excuse, that's the explanation for why he chose to do this.
How
And
long how long did he get?
he got 80 years, but he only had to, because it was premeditated and some other things. So he got 80 years. He only had to serve, but he ended up only serving 27. So he was out of prison 27 years later.
I don't understand it. Like, our legal system has a lot of holes in it, but, like,
Mhm.
murdering somebody, I don't think is a situation that it needs to be more black and white, I think, than it is. Now, I understand if somebody's not in the right headspace and stuff like that based on environment. I have somewhat, you have to try to sympathize with it, but at the same time, it's like, your brother's life was taken. There is no gray area.
Mhm.
It's what happened.
Correct.
And so it's like, you know, um, 27 years. It's just, I mean, there's people who get out after, I've heard, like 7, 10 years, 11 years. I'm like, what, how does any of this make sense? So
Yeah, because it
first of
really
all, my,
depends on the level of it. So, like, if they get manslaughter, right? So, manslaughter is a much lesser charge than murder one. So, like, they
it
gave
could be
my
like
brother, like,
accidental, a car accident, something like
mhm,
that. Right. Yeah.
right.
That makes
Yep.
sense. Hmm. But intentionality, I don't know how they prove any of that either. Like, it was
Mhm.
premeditated. So they have
Right.
records of something where it shows. How did they figure that out?
So leading up, so the guy who murdered my brother, he had 2 warrants out for his arrest. And he was essentially hiding from the police. My brother played a role in that, where the murderer and his girlfriend, his accomplice, were in a hotel room for the week leading up to my brother's murder. And the day that they murdered my brother, he worked third shift. So he got off at like 7 o'clock in the morning. But like on that shift, we later learned that the murderer had called my brother at work, because that's where they originally met, and was like, hey, come to the hotel room after your shift's over. And my brother was like, nah, like, I don't feel well. I just want to go home. And so then the guy's girlfriend called my brother and was like, "Hey, just come to the hotel room afterwards, like just for a few minutes, like we just want to see you, all that stuff." And my brother was like, "No, like I don't feel good." But they kept like calling him at work, and so he was like, "Fine, like I'll come to the hotel room for a few minutes." And so my brother drove over there and they were like, "Hey, let's go for a drive." But it just so happened to be that, 'cause this is 29 years ago, it was payday. It was a Friday. And so they went and they cashed my brother's check. But because my brother wasn't feeling good, he wasn't driving. And so he was in the passenger seat, and the girlfriend was driving my brother's car. And the guy who murdered my brother was sitting behind him. And then they went for one of their routine drives through the forest preserves. I guess they've had done this previously as like kind of like a thing that they hang out and do. And then when they were in the forest preserves where no one else was around,
And this is at
that's when
like
he did it.
7:30 in the morning, 8 o'clock in the morning, because he
Correct.
just
After
got
they
out of
had
work.
cashed, he had gotten out of
Right,
work. They had just cashed his check, so they had all of his money for the
right.
last 2 weeks.
Oh my God.
Hmm.
They killed your brother over a couple of weeks of paychecks.
Correct.
I mean, or
And I mean,
whatever
we
else
don't
was
we
going
don't
on, but
actually know why. Like, we never got that opportunity to ask him. And like I mentioned, he's deceased, so we don't know. I mean,
who
we could
knows what
guess. We
else
could.
they were doing? They may have done that to
Correct.
multiple people and
Hmm.
just like became friends with them, take them to the bank, and then they do that, and oh my God,
Yeah.
my my gut is like in uh, just twisted up right
Hmm.
now, like just
Yeah.
imagining this whole thing. And so you did you say, what was it, disposition is what you were giving at the microphone when you were
Uh,
13? No, there's a different word
Victim
for it.
impact statement.
Impact statement.
Hmm.
Um, so bring us back to that point. You give that, and that's when you started to feel like you, because you learned that this person's childhood, being as bad as it was, um, first of all, they had a deranged perspective on the world
Hmm.
and different things that they were dealing with, and sounds like they were probably taking it out, their aggression, their anger, and obviously leading them to do horrible things. um so at 13 is when you started to get the idea of, I want to help people so they don't get to this point.
Yeah. So then I started. It was funny because, I remember in sixth grade, because I was in fifth grade when all this happened. And in sixth grade, we had to do like some kind of report on what career we wanted to do. And I said I wanted to be a lawyer, because it put bad guys behind, bars. And then I was like, no. And then as I started to kind of go through high school, I remember it was my senior year of high school, and I was in AP Bio. And I remember I was like, okay, I want to help kids, but I don't know if I want to become a psychiatrist or if I want to become a psychologist. And ultimately, I wanted to help kids like the person who murdered my brother, not have their childhoods dictate their futures, and to help them get coping skills so that other kids don't make terrible choices and it sets them down a certain path. And ultimately, like, an 11-year-old doesn't have to lose her best friend because someone else had a rough life.
Hmm. That's super incredible that at a young age you were feeling that, and then you took action on it, and you really did that. Like, you
Hmm.
went and you figured out how to do it. And you know, I'm going to sound like a little bit of a broken record for anybody who's listened to the last couple episodes. I recorded one yesterday, one earlier today, so these three are going to come out in a row. And I keep using the word inspired like over and over and over, and it's just heavy on my heart right now because if you tell somebody to do something, the likelihood they do it is smaller than if they're inspired to do something. And
Hmm.
so through this devastating moment, there's nothing like losing a family member. And so he's your best friend. And I mean, you were inspired. So there's no like, hey, we're going to tell you maybe this is, let's help you get into this. Like, nobody could stop you from doing it, right? That's how inspired you were. And then later on, you were also a tenured professor, I know. And then you made a decision to leave that, right? We're jumping ahead a little bit in the story. I mean, you had job security and stability.
Hmm.
And then you said, this isn't what I really feel called to do. I'm going to start my own business, BrightSpot Families. So tell us about that transition.
Yeah, so I was a tenured professor, so I had been working as a faculty member of clinical child psychology or clinical psychology faculty member for I lasted 9 years. I got tenured in my sixth year. I was on track to go and become a full professor probably within the next few years, but I started to notice something like I was getting burned out. I loved what I was doing in regards to like being with students and teaching students and having relationships with the college students and helping them go down paths that were really right for them. But then all of the other stuff that comes with being a faculty member, like I didn't agree with what administration was deciding. Like, let's build a $20 million building, but it doesn't advance the mission. I was like, that feels icky. That feels gross. Like, that's not what I'm about. And then some
Yeah.
other things kind of happened. And I was like, you know what? Yes, I'm a tenured professor and I can never be fired unless I do some really stupid stuff. And I would never do those stupid things anyways. And so I decided, and I had already started to see clients. I could see 8 clients a week with my contract. But then I was like, you know what? I'm done. And so I resigned in February of 2021. I finished out the semester.
Wow.
And then I joined a private practice called the Anxiety Treatment Center of Greater Toledo here, or, yep, in Ohio. And so I see individuals and I see couples and families and parents, and I do all those kind of things. And it's been super rewarding. And now I'm getting, more into speaking and doing workshops for individuals. And it's just been really, really rewarding. And I feel like this is what I'm called to do.
Yeah, that's incredible. I could feel it in your energy. I see it in your content. I watched your TEDx. Like, just you're emoting with purpose, and
Hmm.
it's inspired me. There's that word again, but it's inspired me to remember like what we're doing. All these different things. We're busy. We're running our businesses. I love doing this podcast. This started as a passion project. It turned into a huge line of my business, and then eventually I just changed my business to only do podcasting and
Hmm.
help clients launch their show and everything. And you just like in the motion of doing it, or like in the action of doing it, sometimes we can forget what our initial purpose was. Like, we're doing it, we love to do it, we want to do a great job at whatever we're doing, but that's different than like, okay, we want to do a great job. Why? Right? Why do we
Hmm.
want it? Like, what
Yeah.
gets us back to that the beginning of like what lights us on fire? And so
Hmm.
whenever I hear you and sharing your story, and we talked again, it was about a year ago, so a lot of this is like,
Yeah.
it's like pulling back at some of the first conversation we had. I just think anyone who's tuning in right now, obviously it doesn't have to always stem from a devastating story, but there's something typically in life. I want people to reflect back and be like, what's the thing that really led me to step out? And many times, most of the time, I'll say stepping out of your comfort zone,
Yeah.
because it's not easy to do what you did. You had a good thing going,
Hmm.
and it was during the pandemic that you stepped away. Like, most people
Yeah.
didn't even feel secure in their good job, and you're like, I got the good job, but
Hmm.
alignment wasn't right. What they were
Right.
doing didn't feel right for you. And so you went out, and then, and what I want you to share is like, so now you're doing these workshops, which I think are really cool. I want to learn more about the workshops, like what goes into them, and then like what do people experience when they're at one of your workshops? And are they virtual or in person or both?
They're both. So I've been doing a lot. There's been a lot of um, interest recently in my audaciously imperfect talk. It's geared towards women, and it's all about how our society has these expectations of women to do like everything and to do everything perfectly, and how we need to push back against these expectations that we put on ourselves and that society puts on us and others put on us, and to live audaciously imperfect lives, which means living lives, challenging others' expectations of us, and living lives on our own terms. And so that was one that I've done for like Sam's Club, and I've done it for the Michigan Medical Billers Association. So some big ones, big names like that. And then I
Wow.
have one coming up that's getting into, I call it the power of relationships talk. Um, there's a much more fancier name. I don't know what it is. I just refer to it as the power of relationships. But it's talking about how we can learn from research on how humans form relationships and how do we have high quality relationships, and how can business owners use this knowledge and this practical strategies to build relationships with people, and instead of these fake ones that we see a lot of the time. So that's one that I give a lot of the time. And then this probably the biggest one that's starting to come up, and it's stemming from my book, the number 2 parenting book. It's talking about how the youth mental health crisis that we're currently experiencing is going to rock businesses. I mean, it's already rocking businesses. We just don't realize it, but it's definitely going to continue to rock businesses unless we start to turn things around.
Wow. So okay, I did not realize that you were going into businesses and things for the workshops. I thought the workshops were more for the families that were either going
Mhm.
through situations or just going into communities, schools, maybe after school events or community events, and kind of educating the youth and their parents on like how to, lead kids in the right direction. But I didn't realize you're going into workplaces and doing things like relationship talks and community and stuff like that. So that's really cool. Is that
Mhm.
something? So you're doing that all in conjunction with one another, right?
Yes, yes. So I'm still
Yeah.
doing like parenting workshops and that kind of stuff. Like back in 2024, earlier this year, I did a group parenting program, which was super rewarding because it was all parents with kids oppositional defiant disorder who are like, it's my bread and butter. I love those kind of kids. Parents like hate them, and other people are like, why are those your favorites? And I'm like, oh my goodness, because I know exactly how to adjust how parents are parenting their child with oppositional defiant disorder so that it goes away, and then parents are no longer hostages. So I'm still doing those things, but then like right now the big focus is to try to get into businesses, because what I don't think a lot of people realize is that the skills that come with parenting are the same skills you need to be a good leader. And so that's, marketable for businesses and stuff like that.
Yeah, 100%. Like it all intertwines, right? So
Mhm.
to be a great parent, you do have to be a leader of your family. And that's if you're the dad or the mom or the single parent or, whatever it might look like. Um, Servant leadership, teaching your kids the right thing, like wiring, like kids are wired. From a very young age, as you know, sponges, and so they learn so much. And one of the things I love from I'm going to say he's a mentor of mine, but and I've met him virtually before. Ed Milet, I had the privilege of actually interviewing him on another podcast as a co-host. But Ed's content is great, and his podcast is awesome, and he talks a lot about like raising his kids, and that one of the things I really learned from him is that what our kids learn is caught, not always taught. And a
Yeah.
lot of times when we're trying to teach and have a teachable moment, like Danny Tanner sitting on the end of the bed, like our kids can kind of turn that off. They're like, oh, come
Mhm.
on, dad, like whatever. And they
Right.
might learn it, but it's like almost like, in spite of the moment, we're still going to do what you say. But like, they're going to catch what you're doing. They're going to pick up on how you do it. If something's on the ground and you walk past it, and then they walk past something, and you're like, hey, when something's on the ground, pick it up. And they just saw you not do it. That's caught. That's caught. And so, how you talk to people, how you treat the person in line at the grocery store, you're going to teach them behaviors, but then they're like, so leading by example is so huge, like you said. But that's not just important in the household, it's in the workplace and
Mhm.
work from home or work in an office with 1,000 people. Like it's important the way that we communicate with one another. And one thing that I will say I like to see, there's changes I've seen, in the last few years. And I think one of the good ones is people are more sensitive in a way where I feel like we're more comfortable, or it's not the right word, but there's an emphasis in that we talk about it a lot of mic'd up, but a lot of the shows I tune into, and also a lot of workplaces I've been involved with. The idea of being vulnerable and like it's okay to not be okay, and to tell
Yeah.
someone if you're not okay. So if you're going through something, it used to be a sign of weakness, especially for men. Like men never wanted to admit that we're not okay. And
Right.
it seems like in the workplace now, at least I've worked in for some big companies over the years. Um, there's more of an emphasis on that. Like there's an avenue to talk to people, and there's a lot of podcasts that focus on that and authentic. When social media content does well, I feel like I look back on it and I look at it, whether it's clients or something I did or something I'm a viewer of on TikTok or whatever. Most of the time, it's the authentic content that does really well because people connect with it. It's not over planned or anything like that.
Right, and that's the interesting piece, like, as I've prepped to this, the power of relationships talk, it's interesting because one of the things as we've moved more into businesses, my brand manager and I have talked about this idea of, like, appropriate vulnerability, because we acknowledge, like, vulnerability is huge right now, but then we wanna make sure that people aren't, like, jumping in and they're, like, being, like, overly vulnerable too soon. Because you can always see that where
Agree.
it's like, where like people will come up to you and be like, "Hi, my name's Andrea. My brother was murdered when I was 11 years old." And I was like, "Whoa, like slow down."
Yeah.
Like you don't lead in with that like right away. Let's talk about like how to like read a
Right.
room and be appropriately vulnerable. But yeah, like that's something that like we're getting more in, like we're diving more into that concept.
I have that problem. I have that problem when I meet someone. I get too comfortable too soon because I'm comfortable talking about uncomfortable things, and
Yeah.
sometimes people are like, "Man, you just gave me everything, didn't you?" And I'm like, "Well, that's me. I'm not hiding anything."
Right. Yeah. And some people it works for, and other people, like I think there's like a charismatic, like you're a charismatic guy, but there's like other people. I remember I used to do this activity in my lifespan development class, and it's called social status. And there's different, like five different levels of social status in like an organization or like a group. There's the popular people, there's the rejected people, the ones that people no one likes. There's the controversial where half people like them and half people like hate them. And then there's the neglected, like people don't even know they exist. And then it's kind of like the catch all category, everyone. But I remember there's this one time where I didn't even have to do the peer status like nominations in my class. Like I knew this one student was going to be rejected because they just were not aware at all of how they came across. And I felt so bad for them. I'm like, oh, can I just help you? Um, but yeah,
Yeah, and like I just love that you're also so in tune with everything that's going on. I see it in your social media content. You're oftentimes talking a lot about topical things, right?
mhm,
So, like the things you're talking about are important to people because it's real situations. And like you said, like the relationally to connect with people and, to allow them to open up and share their story, but to know that you don't necessarily do that on the first time you're meeting
yeah,
someone, new. Um, and that could be first day in the job. It could be going out for someone on a first date, like
mhm,
it's important to, you don't want to put out a fake version of yourself, but it also is appropriate to, share things as it's the right time, and when do you know it's the right time? It's one of those things where when we say we have a gut feeling,
mhm,
there's more to it. Like our gut does
yeah,
have more to it than just digesting food. There is something about our body. Our body tells us when it's okay, right? Like it's a
mhm,
feeling, and it's an energy. So I definitely think that's super important for people to be in tune with that. A theme that we've discussed on Mic'd Up quite a bit, multiple times, is the idea that somebody's shortcomings can become their superpower. I love
yes,
this conversation. I know it's something that you can talk about. shortcomings are not always natural, right? It could be something we're born with. It may be our environment that we're in, our upbringing. Hearing your story, I feel like this is really part of your journey. So, can you share how your past, your personal story, you shared a little bit with us, how it's actually uniquely qualified you? Maybe you don't want to use the word qualified, but it's called you, right, to help
Mhm.
children struggling with aggression, antisocial tendencies. Like, give us your take on that.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the time when people hear my story, like daughter of a Mexican immigrant, grew up on the south side of Chicago in a gang infested territory, brother was murdered, a lot of people were like, whoa. Um, and it's like hit after
It's
hit
heavy.
after hit. It's heavy. And I think, but then I look a certain way. I look very professional and those kind of things. And I remember when I was working with some of the most antisocial and aggressive teenagers in the nation when I was on internship at Boys Town. And I my experiences growing up on the South Side, I don't talk professionally all of the time. I work with teenagers. And so a lot of the time, like I don't sit like this. A lot of the time I'm like, slouched and like leaning in or using my body language. And I use phrases that they aren't used to adults, like especially like a professional, like a doctor using with them. And so I remember I had this 16-year-old, and she, was talking, we were talking, and I was like, you know what? I'm just gonna shoot it to you straight. And she starts laughing because she's like, I'm just not used to people like you, like doctors and adults, like using this kind of language with me and just like cutting through all the BS and just being like, okay, let's figure out like what is it that you have to do. And so I think like those shortcomings of being low income, like being raised in a low income environment, helps me now because not only can I understand what it is like to be low income and then not to be low income anymore. It's like I talk in my head, it's like individuals in low income environments, they need to learn like a middle class playbook. And so I think I'm able to give them like, hey, because I used to be on the board for Habitat for Humanity and I would work with the families directly, like the ones that were, building the houses or we were building the houses for, and we would have conversations. It's like, okay, well, you typically do this. It's not working for you. Let's talk about what you could be doing differently to get you better results, to get you to this higher level of income so that you're not stuck in that lower socioeconomic status for longer than you need to be.
Hmm. Something I just talked to, shout out to my latest guest, James Bracken. And it's really one of the first times I heard this on the show. I told him it was the first time, but that's just off of my memory, that the idea of addition by subtraction
Mhm.
in goal setting, we were talking about, like from like with the new year right around the corner. And he's like, instead of like adding all these big goals and he's like, just going like, pie in the sky numbers and all this stuff. He's like, what I really focus on is eliminating the things I don't want to happen in 2025. So, like, what am I doing now that I don't want to happen? So, when you just told me about going in and talking to families and trying to get that, those that are struggling to have a little bit more of the middle class mentality, but not just mentality, how to run a household without there
Mhm.
being a lot of turmoil in it.
Yeah.
Um, it feels like an addition by subtraction. Like, what things do we need to remove from our environment so we can then create a healthy environment? Because if you try to add in different elements that are healthy and happy, but you still have things like whether it's drugs or violence or, there's whatever, illegal weapons, all kinds of things
Right.
that could be potentially causing your family harm or the people you hang out with. It doesn't have to be a thing in the house, person or who you're hanging out with that we talk a lot about the five people you hang out with, right? And so,
Mhm.
but it's hard because I'm just thinking I'm really trying to put myself in a scene where I'm growing up in a family that's in a really rough situation, right? Financial situation, and then parents that are either not present or present, but they're on drugs or they're not present there to actually raise a family. And how do you, as a kid, like, what can they do, right? So it's difficult there. Um, and then, like, how do you get into that family and start to try to help them? Like, what are some of the first steps you really, I don't know, like, when you're, how do you get their attention? Because I feel like a lot of times if people are in that environment, whether it's an ego thing or they're just struggling so bad they don't want help from someone who they think is maybe trying to, they don't trust you, they don't know who you are. So how do you get in there and
Mhm.
actually make a difference?
So this is actually my superpower, and I knew this going into my internship, is that I have the ability to form relationships with people very, very quickly. And I think the biggest thing to get people and to get youth it bought in is you have to have a relationship with them. You can't go in and automatically start trying to change things because they're going to push back against you. They're going to put up those barriers. And so you want to go in and you really want to build those relationships. Um, because research shows that the best way to get individuals out, like kids, out of low income environments and have them experience social mobility and become more middle class is by mentors and relationships. That's why programs such as like Big Brothers and Big Sisters and Habitat for Humanity, like putting kids in those environments around people who are willing to have those relationships in them and invest in those youth, that's why it's so impactful. Like just today I was talking with a client and I was like, okay, I can't go in like guns a-blazing. I need to pull back and I need her to like realize what she's doing isn't working for her because I don't have the relationship piece yet.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And the other thing to remember too, that I'm realizing as you're saying this, is it's not a quick fix. It's something that's going to take time. It's a foundational adjustment. So building that and creating that is going to take time. It's not, and then the other thing is, like you said, showing them an environment that is healthy, where there is
Mhm.
love, where there is care. And then for them, that's like a shot of like a light breaking through, where now like you shine the light on them and now they
Mhm.
see what it could look like and you give them that possibility. And I think the biggest word that comes to me right here is hope. You give them
Mhm.
the idea of hope
Yeah.
that their life could be different. And then so they know that, oh, on the other side of this, there's that light cracking through the dark clouds. If I follow that, I can get to a place where I can have a loving relationship from people who actually do care about me. But like you said, trust isn't built over in a flash. It could be broken in a split second. You can lose
Yeah.
someone's trust in an instance, but to build up real trust in a relationship, it takes time. Like I said, foundational time. And so that's just important for anyone who's tuning in right now. Maybe they're a situation with their children or a relationship that they're kind of like, I don't understand why this isn't all happening and it's not coming together. It does take time.
Mhm.
So with that, you know, to all the parents tuning in right now, would you like to say to them, so maybe, and it doesn't have to be low income or someone that's struggling from a scenario like that, but just anyone who's trying to connect with their kid, right? And their child may be showing signs of help. And what do you suggest that parents look for is like indicators, and how do we best connect with them?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing that I talk about with parents, and it was so funny, Mike, that you were talking about like addition by subtraction. And it's parenting right now. I mean, our attorney general came out and said like parents are burned out. Like 5.5 million American parents are at clinical levels of like parental burnout. And it's just because we're trying to do so much. We want our children to be successful. And so we're trying to do all of the things, but we don't have to
Right.
do all of the things. And so I think the number one thing that parents can be doing, and no parent wants to hear this, and everyone is probably going to roll their eyes, but it's put your phones down and have a conversation or interaction or some quality time with your child and let them lead. It's like, hey, we have an hour. What would you like to do for this hour? And if they want to play games, if they want to, roughhouse, if they want to go for a walk, what if they want to bake something, whatever it is, it's like to let them take the lead and really be engaged with them for that whatever amount of time you have. You might not have an hour. You might only have 5 to 10 minutes, and that's okay. It's all about quality time over quantity of time. You don't have to do all of the things. You just have to do a few of the small things really, really well.
Yeah. Really, really well said. And it's a reminder with the holidays coming up. Yeah, of course, we're going to give our kids a lot of presents and put presents under the trees. And those that can do it, it's a beautiful thing and it's a great way to show love. But at the same time, the greatest presents that we can give our kids is our presence,
Mhm.
right? Just being in the
Yeah.
moment with them and listening to them. And I like what you just said. Hey, we got an hour. What do you want to do? And I do that with my daughter, but sometimes I forget the part about what do you want to do. I'll say, hey, let's do this together. Let's do that together. Hey, I got to go run and do this thing. You come with me, and I teach her whatever we're doing. I keep her involved, but at the same time, it's like, okay, because on Tuesdays I get her for dinner, and so we do Taco Tuesday. Her choice,
Mhm.
by the
Yeah.
way. She loves taco. We go to the same place, Taco Maya. Shout out, not a sponsor. It's a great little place. I don't think they're all over the place right now, but I guess it is a chain. So, like in the
Mhm.
East Coast, taco. Have you ever had Taco Maya?
I have
Very
never
good.
had taco Maya. We do taco Wednesdays,
Okay, why not?
but at
Make
our
up your own
house.
thing at your house, homemade. Yeah.
Homemade.
And so we love it, but like that little reminder of, hey, what do you want to do? Because they'll be more engaged and inspired to do something fun. That is so wonderful. And I know a lot of parents, like you said, rolling the eyes. Hey man, I'm working 2 jobs. I'm in between this and that. I got bills to pay. I got important things. But like what your kids want from you is free. They just
Mhm.
want you to pause for a moment. It doesn't have to be all day. You don't have to take a day off of work. Pause in the moment and don't just like say you care, because your kids can tell the difference between like saying that you're doing something good and just feeling it and doing it and actually caring. That's a difference, huge difference. And yeah, and I like what you said there. I just wanted to make sure I paused and actually lived in the moment, like we're talking about.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's something that's super important. Like I always tell parents, like your attention is your child's currency. Yes, they'll say that they want like all of the things, but really what they want is simply your attention.
Or if they get the toy, like play with it with them.
Yeah. Hmm.
Don't just be like, here's your toy for Christmas, and then go in the corner and play with it. Like,
Right.
if it's not something, maybe it's, she was on a Pokemon collecting kick for a while, collecting the cards and stuff. I never did as a kid. Pokemon wasn't my thing. It was kind of a little bit behind I'm 38, so I think I was a little bit older than like when it was in the height of it and everything. But it was
Right.
around my childhood, and I just never had the interest in it. But like now, when she's into it, I'm like, yeah, tell me about this guy and that guy. I don't know what it is, but I'm looking at the card. I'm like, why is this one better than that one, right? And like,
Right.
but but being in the moment, it's all that matters. And yeah,
Hmm.
so really, really cool. Is there anything, I know I keep checking the time, being mindful of you. I know you got a super busy day and everything that you got going on with what you're doing. But is there anything I didn't bring up that you're like, hey, I got the microphone here. I'm on mic'd up with Mike, and you just wanted to get it out to the world?
I think the biggest thing is, I think the big thing was when we talked before, this hadn't come out yet, but it's out now. The number two
Oh,
parenting book,
cool.
Practical Tips for the Pooped Out Parent. So the whole premise of the book is practical parenting tips in a time it takes you to poop. A mom poop, not a dad poop, because those are different.
That is an A+ for marketing
Yeah.
right there. A+. That's funny. And those of you that are listening to this on like Apple or Spotify, the cover of Andrea's book has toilet paper on it.
Yep. And there's
And I'm
Coop the
gonna
Poop.
Coop the Poop. There's a mascot and everything. Look at this. This is
There is.
incredible. Um, I'm going to link your book, and I'm actually going to get that for myself too.
Awesome.
I'm
Thank
going
you.
to link it in the show notes with everything else, your social media, and just a great resource for parents out there. Thank you, Andrea, for sharing that. And if anyone's interested in buying that, just check out the show notes right there. And so I know you only have a couple more minutes, and I appreciate you giving us a full hour for our audience. Um, I mentioned earlier, like if there's anything that we didn't talk about yet, you mentioned the book, but is there like a message you want to just get out to, whether it's parents or just people, someone who's struggling right now, just anything that you feel, hey, take this into the rest of your day, just some words of encouragement from yourself.
Yeah, so I think the biggest takeaway is actually the first chapter of the book, other than the intro. And it's talking about how you can always recover. You can always get better. You can always learn coping skills or relationship skills or parenting skills, whatever, wherever you're at in your life that you're struggling with, you can always get better and you can always recover.
Yeah. So powerful. And one of the things I've been talking with my other guests about, it's been heavy on my heart and just top of mind, is we have the power within, right? It's not like we have to go buy something. We don't have to save up for it, or it's literally like we can make those changes within ourselves. It's a mindset shift. But what's really important, like you said with the kids, man, my biggest takeaway is get someone out of that environment and show them some hope, because that little seed is planted in that little kid's heart. And there's a Buffalo Bill. You can see I'm a Bills fan. As you know, I'm from Buffalo. Even though I'm in Philly, I gotta whisper it, because Philly fans, they don't fool around if they
They
know
are
you're not rooting
crazy.
for.
Oh my
Philly fans
goodness.
are a little crazy. Like, I'm a Yankees and Bills fan in
Mhm.
Philadelphia, and I've survived 45 days here. But I think I should start like a separate podcast about surviving as a Bills and Yankees fan. But at least the Bills are in a different conference. And so are the Yankees, really, but there's some bad blood there. What I'm trying to say is Ray Davis, Buffalo Bills running back. He's a rookie, awesome player, fantastic on the football field, even more incredible off the football field. He came from the foster care system. You should look into his story. I want to get him on the show, but check it out. But he's a great example. He went through that system. His percentage chance of growing up and having a successful life, and I'm just using the word successful, meaning get through it, survive
Right.
through it,
Mhm.
thrive through it in a career that you're great at. And football was his outlet. It was his way to get around other people and other kids and families. Great player on the football field, but now he's in the NFL, and you should see what he's doing. He's got a lot of cool activities and organizations he's putting on for helping the foster care system that he was a part of. So talk about being inspired. You were inspired through what happened to your brother, and he was inspired through what happened to his brothers, himself, his family, and his other brothers and sisters that he saw in the foster care system. So my last words to our audience today is just get reconnected if you're disconnected with your purpose. And Andrea had a horrible situation, devastating situation with her brother and her family that they work through and still continue to. It's not like one day it just goes away. But that's part of her purpose. I have my purpose for doing the show. I love helping people and connecting you with great people like Andrea. So find that thing. That's my big takeaway today. Find your purpose and reconnect with it. So, Andrea, I like to end every episode with this: be great and be grateful. I'm grateful for you being on the show. And I just want to remind everybody, if you're liking the content and you love the episodes, go on, if you're on YouTube, hit that like button, subscribe so you actually get, notified, turn your notifications on so you see when the latest episodes drop. And if you're on Apple, you can actually follow us there. There's a follow button so you get all the updates when new episodes come out. Spotify has the same thing. Both Apple and Spotify, you can leave a review, which helps us in the rankings as well, because it shows that there's a lot of people who dig it. And we want to be social. So comment on social media, comment on YouTube, because we want it to be a community. We want it to be a conversation. Andrea's on the show here. I'm on the show here, but we want to see your feedback, and we want, so share like what this means to you. But if you also have a story, maybe you have a comeback story of your own that you want to share, please connect with me and do that. And I just want to help as many people as possible. This podcast is powered by Social Chameleon. That's my company, socialchameleon.us. Transform your podcast. So if you want great sounding and looking content and a podcast out on all the different players that we just talked about, YouTube included, and also social media content, go to socialchameleon.us. And also navigatingyourbooks.com. Navigator Bookkeeping is who does our books. It's out of sight, out of mind, and Nate and his team are fantastic. So go to navigatingyourbooks.com. And then all of Andrea's information, again, for the 12th time, is in the show notes. I just want people to know we're very intentional to make sure that it's all there, so that it's really easy to find. So I'm grateful for you being on the show. Thank you so much. And I'm grateful for you being a part of my network and a friend and being on the show and sharing your love with all of our audience members today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you.